man fits into the class of rich and famous. He is none other than Mr. Frank Islam, who is the chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group located in Tysons Corner, Virginia. Here on the set, Mr. Islam's guest is Dr. Walter Anderson, who is the Deputy Director of South Asian Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Let's catch these two gentlemen in their interesting dialogue.
Welcome to this inaugural edition of Washington Current Review. My name is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group. We hope that you enjoy this new segment of Salam India, where we'll interview leading voices from business and politics and explore topics of current interest that impact you, the viewer. We plan to ask the thoughtful questions that you would ask and probe into areas that you care about. And we begin today by examining the topic of the new dynamics in U.S.-India relationship with our guest, Dr. Walter Anderson, Associate Director of South Asia Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Walter, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I know not too long ago you testified on the Capitol Hill about the U.S.-India relationship. Let me ask you a question. During the Cold War, India's cooperation with Russia caused the United States to get cozy with Pakistan and prevented real development of U.S.-India relationship. Now that the Cold War is over, what are the new dynamics that define the relationship?
Well, I think there are three things that define the relationship with the U.S. And you're absolutely right. It was the end of the Cold War that enabled all three to take place. The first is economic. India adopted market reforms, and with that, it had to globalize its economy. And the U.S. has proved to be India's most important trading partner and one of the major investors in India. So that's one important aspect. And one indication of that is to look at the Indian trade, including trade with us. And since 2001, it's tripled. I mean, that's quite a significant expansion.
No question about that.
And the second is strategic, that the U.S. and India have major issues in common with each other in the Indian Ocean area. And so we have a strategic linkage as well, and that's become increasingly closer. And you can see that most recently in Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's decision to go ahead with the nuclear deal, which we might want to talk about later, since that's a very significant event, both in terms of Indian politics and the U.S. And third is the Indian American community. The Indian American community is one of the most influential ethnic groups in the United States, and it made its voice heard in the nuclear deal. It's well organized. It's a wealthy community, and it's organizing to advance its own interests.
You're absolutely right. The Indian American community are the heart and soul of the relationship that we have been able to develop between India and U.S. Let me ask you a second question. Since the date of independence, India has always had a mantra of self-sufficiency, has been very cautious in ensuring that it's dealing with other countries, has been as an equal partner. Now there is talk about India, can you believe that? And the U.S. becoming allies militarily, given their common interest in curbing the rise of China, the fight against terrorism, and their common nuclear capability. Is this a real, Walter, the military alliance between India and the U.S., is it likely?
There's a growing strategic relationship, but a military alliance in the way we normally think of it is not likely. India, as you rightly said at the beginning of your question, has a strong sense of its own strategic autonomy. And it has always had that. For example, even during the days it was closest to the USSR, there were never Soviet troops on Indian soil, ever. And the Indians, I think, will continue to be very concerned that they are not locked into a military alliance. However, that being said, they are developing a case-by-case approach with the U.S. because, as you said, there are strong interests in common. One is how to manage the rise of China, which is a concern for us and them. And the other is how to handle the Indian Ocean sea lanes, from which most of the oil that the world uses because of the Persian Gulf. The source of the larger part of energy in the world comes from the Persian Gulf, and it's exported by tanker. And the Indian Ocean right now is very vulnerable to piracy and to terrorism.
And you know, the India and the U.S. Share the common goals and the common values when it comes to curbing the terrorism. And India has been victim to terrorism for a long, long time. So you're absolutely right. Let me ask you another question. What are the main areas in which India and the U.S. can cooperate? And what is going to take this to happen, Walter?
Well, actually, they have already begun cooperating. And take the issue of terrorism that you just raised. In 2002, the Indian Navy helped escort American cargo ships that was supplying Operation Enduring Freedom against the Taliban terrorists in Afghanistan. India has had periodic exercises, military exercises with the U.S., so that in times of a crisis, our navies and air forces and armies can cooperate easily. And in fact, last September, we and the Indians and a few other countries had the largest maneuvers in the Indian Ocean ever held by combined powers. And the purpose of that was to develop ways to cooperate in case there was a terrorist incident or a incident with piracy. And I think what we're seeing is we're moving closer and closer to some kind of multilateral agreement by which we cooperate in protecting the vital Indian Ocean. And it's especially vital for India because most Indian trade goes by sea and goes by sea over the Indian Ocean sea lanes. Most of the oil and gas that goes to Japan, China, and Korea goes via the Indian Ocean through the Straits of Malacca into the East China Sea. So the protection of those sea lanes is critical for the world. If there were to be some kind of closure, there would be a world crisis.
Well, what a great point you made. As a matter of fact, we are at the dawn of the new millennium. We have a wonderful relationship between India and U.S., and both share the common values and vision about the politics and what's going on in the world. Let me ask you another question. As you know, there will be change in Washington, D.C. in November. It's going to be bound to change. We don't really know it's going to be Republican or the Democrats, but somebody else is going to occupy the White House. And there's a possibility to change in New Delhi from elections. What does the future hold, Walter, for U.S.-India relationship in light of this new occupant at the White House?
I'd say whatever happens in terms of occupying the White House, or whatever happens in New Delhi as to the prime ministership, I think that the fundamentals of the relationship will sustain it as it is now. In both countries, now the reason I say that has the two reasons. One is both countries operate towards the ideological center. To get in power in the U.S., to get in power in India, you have to move toward the center. And you move toward the center, there's in fact an enormous amount of agreement on basic issues. Sometimes during political campaigns, both in India and the U.S., one thinks that there are bigger differences than in fact exist. And on the Indo-U.S. relationship, the fundamentals are that the relationship will continue to improve. It goes at various paces, but the issue is not the direction. The direction is positive. The question is the speed of the direction. And if the nuclear deal, in fact, does go all the way through, I'd say that will open up for greater speed in the relationship.
Do you think it's going to happen under the watchful eye of the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and the President George W. Bush?
Well, he has, the Prime Minister of India has announced that they will sign with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is they've been in abeyance for a while. It next has to go to a second group called the Nuclear Suppliers Group, an international consortium. And that can happen fairly fast. And then it has to go to the U.S. Congress for final approval. I'm optimistic all this will happen, and all will happen, I think, relatively soon.
Well, thank you very much for coming on this show. We appreciate that very much.
Well,
thank you, Walter.
My pleasure to be in your inaugural show.
Thank you very much.